So we get that it is December, so we appreciate you being here. We know the buildings can be challenging at this time, especially with 3 weeks between Thanksgiving and winter break. So again, we do appreciate you being here for this coaching network. So again, if you can, please go ahead, rename yourself at the bottom. If you click on participant, you can go to rename yourself and then just add the organization that you're with. And we appreciate you taking the time to be here. Again, here are those steps for you to do so. We will have an activity depending on which breakout room you choose to go into. One is going to be a very conversation heavy, so it would be nice to know what district people are from and who they're talking to for that. So without further ado, our icebreaker for today. We're talking about data. Typically when we have our December PBIS meeting like this, it's usually something very festive, although there is no snow outside yet. But I'm going straight towards data. How are you feeling about either data collection and probably more importantly, the aspect of what you're doing with your data? So from a scale of A, B, C, or D, drop it in the chat. Just give us an idea of how you're feeling about it. All right, some mixed C, B. Depends sometimes, I think, what we're pulling from. All right. Feeling okay with it. All right. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Kind of just a quick little gauge. Again, today's presentation is from this link. I'm going to drop it in the chat as well. And throughout the day or afterwards, you can always grab it throughout. So this is always going to be a live link that you can have access to. So there is that in the chat. And again, a reminder, if you register for our PBIS coaching network, what we'd like to do is follow up with you all, regardless if you're actually in attendance, because again, we understand that buildings can be stressful at this time. So you'll get a pretty comprehensive email from me that will include the notes from the meeting, but also a recording, since this is being recorded, and you'll get most of it. Sometimes it is edited to where some of it is cut out, some of it's trimmed up, but you get the meat and potatoes of the meeting. So last month in November, we talked about mental health integration. ESC consultant Megan Kennegaraj talked about how that looks in a PBIS setting. We also talked about resources within Cuyahoga County that you all can look at and grab. So again, my goal is to get this out to you sometime tomorrow, possibly Monday at the latest, with this recap. All right, so be on the lookout for that. Here is our PBIS consultant team. Again, that comprises of the ESC of Northeast Ohio and the State Support Team Region 3. Always got to touch on the purpose. We're looking to share best practices, talk about receiving technical assistance, and just maximizing our capacity for PBIS with fidelity in the region. And now this piece is our agenda for today. We moved some things around, but again, it should be pretty jam-packed in regards to what we're delivering and some of the activities we have. So we'll have the TFI focus review, which Erica's going to go over. Leah's going to take on the cultural responsive considerations. We have some great speakers today from CHUH for a building and district spotlight, talking about database decision-making, and then we'll go into our activities, and then we'll finish up with our updates regionally and statewide. All right, so I'm kicking it to Erica, and enjoy.
So let's get into this discussion about database decision making. And as we have this discussion today, we're going to really focus on the items in the TFI. We know that data is an integral part of every single portion of your multi-tiered system of support. So we're going to be looking a little bit at tiers 1, 2, and 3 today. So if you look at the slide here, the specific items that we'll reference will be 1.12, 13, and 14, 2.10, 11, and 12, and then 3.14, 15, and 16. We'll talk about those individually in just a second. Next slide, please. So I like this little thing. Get all the information you can. We'll think of a use for it later. Sometimes we feel that way, that we're just collecting data for data's sake. We just kind of feel that way sometimes, but obviously we want the data that we collect to be purposeful. So next slide. 2 things we want to keep in mind. First of all, I think you've seen this before. I've even seen this on the t-shirts. If it's not documented, it didn't happen. And then we can add that second part there, that if it's not captured in your action plan, it won't happen. So what do we mean by that? Well, if it's not documented, then can we really say it happened or not? And then when we think about what's captured in your action plan, collecting data has to lead to action. We can't just keep discussing the problem without developing a solution. You think about when someone has a medical issue, we go to the doctor, do we go through the testing, get a diagnosis, and then drop the ball when it comes to the treatment? No, we follow through with the treatment because we're looking for a healthy outcome. So why would it be any different educationally? Why would we test and diagnose educationally, collect all this data, but then just kind of let it sit? We really want to follow through with treatment when it comes to the educational realm as well. And that includes making sure we have someone that's responsible for those next steps. So that's why in our action plan, you've got what the steps are, and then we also add who's responsible for that. So we know who's taking that up. And that's what informs our decision making, isn't it? Next slide. So let's talk about our why when it comes to data. Obviously, it's essential for good decision making. It holds everyone in that realm accountable, doesn't it? Everyone takes responsibility for being accountable for those outcomes that we're hoping to have. And then when we make decisions with accurate data, then that means that what we decide is more likely to be implemented and more likely to be effective. So let's get specifically into what this should look like at each of our different tiers, starting with tier 1. So tier 1, 1.12 is discipline data, 1.13 database decision making, and then 1.14 is our fidelity data. So when we're thinking the discipline data, that one is that our tier 1 team has instantaneous access to graph reports summarizing discipline data. Oh, there we go. Organized by the frequency of the problem behavior of events by behavior, location, time of day, and individual student. So when we're thinking about getting a 2 on that, it means that it already exists. It gives us instantaneous access to those graphs of frequency. And the question that we really have at the back of our mind is, are our efforts making a difference? That's what we're thinking about when we're looking at that discipline data. When we think about database decision making, it's that we're using that discipline data at least monthly to make those decisions. We're reviewing it and looking at it monthly. So that's our question we're going to keep in mind. Are we reviewing it monthly? And are we developing action steps when needed? If the data lends itself to modifying a current action step, to adding another action step, are we doing that? And are we doing that monthly? And then we think about fidelity data. Are we doing what we said we would do? All the systems that we put into place, are we doing what we said we would do? So those are 3 things that we want to keep in mind when we're looking at data at the tier 1 level. What about when we're talking about the tier 2 level? So we think about level of use, student performance data, and then fidelity data. We're always thinking about outcomes and fidelity, student outcomes and fidelity. So starting off with our level of use, we always want to track how many students are receiving those tier 2 supports. Is that something that we're tracking? That's what we want to keep in mind. So when we're looking at the TFI 2.10, for that 2, the team defines criteria and tracks proportion with at least 5% of students receiving tier 2 supports. So I was going to make sure that we've got at least 5% of our student body receiving those tier 2 supports. When we're looking at our student performance data, are our efforts making a difference? And are we monitoring progress of individual students receiving those tier 2 supports? Because obviously we want to make sure that we've got our entry criteria, our exit criteria to be able to fade those supports in, fade them out as necessary. But are we monitoring individual student progress? That's our outcomes. And then fidelity, are we reviewing the fidelity of each of our tier 2 practices? Obviously, we're going to have multiple interventions at place at that tier 2 level. Are we monitoring it to make sure that it's achieving what we hope that it would achieve? So things to keep in mind. And then when we have that data decision at tier 3, we're thinking about our data systems, our database decision-making, and the level of use. And then when we look at it at this level, we're looking at outcomes and fidelity together for the system, as well as outcomes and fidelity for individual students. So when we think about our data systems, are we tracking and sharing that fidelity and impact data with staff? Are we tracking it to begin with? And then are we also sharing that out with our stakeholders? And we think about those decisions. Are we tracking impact data for each student regarding quality of life? And then academic outcomes and behavior outcomes, are we tracking that? And then again, our level of use, are we tracking how many students are receiving all of these supports? And again, for our 2, when we're thinking level of use, again, that's all students requiring tier 3 supports, and at least 1% of students have plans. So obviously, when we look at tier 3, we are looking at your BIPs, your behavior intervention plans, but keeping in mind, again, what percentage of our student body are receiving that. And then again, keeping a track of the fact that we've got our entry and exit criteria clearly defined, and as well as just the different teams, our student support teams, as well as our tier 3 team, keeping track of all of that. So all of this is important. So now when we kind of shift this into the lens of cultural responsiveness, how can we take all of that into consideration? And of course, there's such a thing as too much data. So of course we want it to be purposeful. But now when we think about culturally responsive practice, Leah's going to kind of look at those same items and pull out a couple of pieces that we want to keep in mind when we're being culturally responsive, when we're looking at our tiered data. So Leah, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Oh, Leah, you got the mute on.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Good morning.
Morning.
Classic mistake. Sorry about that. All right, let's talk for a couple minutes about like culturally responsive considerations and integration of that lens within a PBIS program. So for the next couple minutes, I'm going to share a few resources that are linked directly through some of the data considerations that Erica mentioned. This is a great starting point. If you are just at a place where your team or your district is considering culturally responsive practices, this is, I guess, your first resource I would recommend going to, which is the PBIS Cultural Responsiveness Field Guide. This field guide outlines a framework for embedding equity in your school-wide systems. It's a pretty lengthy document, so do not let it intimidate you upon initially like picking it up. It is chock full of great stuff, primarily focusing on your tier 1 systems. So this companion guide goes through the different components of the tier 1 program and specifically shows you ways to align your TFI and your PBIS school-wide program with cultural responsive practices, along with several appendixes that provide training resources and activities that you can do with your team or your staff as a whole to guide them along this process. So this is a great starting point, and this is where I would recommend beginning your journey for integrating cultural responsive practices. And then linking that to this too, there is a fantastic tool, the culturally responsive TFI, that adapts the school-wide PBIS TFI to integrate the culturally responsive practices. So these two resources go hand in hand. And every time I am reviewing culturally responsive practices or providing some type of training or putting something together, this is a document that I always have in front of me with that. So these are both two great documents to start with. Now, looking at tier 1 specifically, like Erica referenced, you'll notice the word desegregated pop up on here, and you're looking specifically within your discipline data to see what the data is showing you. And like Erica referenced, sometimes too much data is not a good thing. It's like, as you dive into this, it's very easy to become overwhelmed by the sheer vast amount of data you can find. So my recommendation, especially if you are going to start the process of disaggregating your data, is maybe pick an area to focus on, whether it's your special education population, or maybe you want to look at a population based on like your EL population. I would not recommend trying to do it all at once to start. I would start figuring out your systems utilizing a piece of that disaggregated data. Florida's PBIS website, which is linked on this slide, has a lot of resources. And what I really like about their website is they break it down by tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. So if you do look into their website, the cultural responsive resources, though, are all linked under tier 1. So you won't see those specifically under the higher tiers, but they can be utilized for the higher tiers. So one of the resources on their website that is a great starting point for these TFI components is the student belonging profile. And what I like about it, and you could see, is on the bottom, there's different tabs for some of those different pieces of disaggregated data. So for example, if you wanted to look at, like I said, your special education population of your building, there is a tab just intended for that. So it's a great spreadsheet resource for looking at your data. So for tier 2, another great resource, and again, some in red, you're going to see some overlap with linkage on the TFI. Again, we're looking at that student data to see the level of use, tracking it, looking at the student performance and your fidelity data. A resource here that can be used again for tier 2, but across the tiers, is the discipline disproportionality problem solving. It's a guide working through, okay, what do we do with this data? So now that I have this data, what's next? So this guide provides some steps towards, if you're looking to solve a problem through that lens, and what your team can do. So, I mean, it is a fantastic source that really guides your team walking through creating an action, like Erica referenced, like creating an action plan based on that data, writing it down and coming up with a plan. And then in conclusion, talking about tier 3, go on. I'm also going to reference back to that Florida PBIS website. They have, while it doesn't fall under the culturally responsive lens in their categorization of their website, they have a great tracking tool that can be utilized within your tier 3 program. And under that tier 3 tab, they have a resource called the Indicator 4A, 4B Equity Profile, which really dives in further to your tier 3 population equity profile and like how that looks within a culturally responsive lens within your program. So I'm going to drop my email into the chat. If anyone has any interest in discussing any of these resources further or talking through or have any questions about culturally responsive practices, feel free to reach out to me via email. We can hop on a phone call. We can set up a time to chat about it further. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, very much. So she's got some great resources there. She put her email in the chat. So please feel free to reach out to her if you'd like to know a little bit more about some of those resources. So now we're going to turn to our district spotlight. If you can advance the next slide for me, please. There we go. So for our building spotlight, I should say, for today, we're going to have some colleagues from Cleveland Heights, University Heights, CHUH. Our speakers today will be Cheryl Walton, instructional specialist for behavior support, and Maggie Brooks, first grade teacher from Fairfax Elementary School. So ladies, please, you have the floor.
Good morning. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to share. Can we forward the slide? So I am going to talk a little bit about the district perspective and some examples that we use as a district to use database decision making. And then Maggie's going to talk about it from the elementary perspective and give some examples that she does at the elementary school. So we have 7 elementary schools, 2 middle schools, and a high school, including a virtual academy. And I'm just going to talk about how we use data to drive our decisions. So we start with the district leadership team when they meet monthly. Our data director gives us behavior data for the month that we use to support students' behavioral needs so that we can address our district climate goal, which is to reduce the infractions of students of negative behavior that lead to out-of-school suspensions by a certain percentage. We also have a goal to give supports to students for chronic absenteeism. So at those meetings, at the district leadership meetings, the data is given and reviewed and used to make decisions. After that, that is given to me, and I support the district with PBIS. So every month, at our district PBIS meetings, we look at our data and decide what we're going to do with it. So we analyze it and we make decisions about how we can best support our students. So we have, we use Infinite Campus in Cleveland Heights. So we use Infinite Campus to get our data. And this is an example, it's kind of blurred out, but this is an example of like a 1-sheet data view. And it gives us a lot of information. This is for the whole district, but each school can pull their own data. But this one view can give us information about the number of students, the number of incidents, the top 5 incidents, the top 5 resolutions, the locations of where the behavior is happening, the top 5 incidents that are resulting in emergency removal or suspension. It also gives us the number of students that have been removed from instruction. So it gives us a lot of information on this one page. It gives us, we also have one for attendance also. And what we do is we take this data monthly and we analyze it. And one of the ways that we use the data is using the problem of practice. Can you forward that? Can you forward the slide? So this is an example of the problem of practice that we use when we have our district meetings. When I say our district meetings, we have a representative, a PBIS representative from each school, and then we come together, and the principals are invited also. And we come together once a month and we look at data and we make decisions about it. And we are virtual. So when we meet, we're virtual. So we can't do this in person. So we use a Jamboard, which is just as effective because we are able to, everyone's voices can be heard and we can get everyone's ideas down. So the problem of practice is a protocol, whereas we take a few minutes just to review and analyze the district data. What is the data telling us? What are the top 5 locations? What are the which days of the week are these incidents happening the most? So we look at the data, take a few minutes, and we analyze it and see what information it gives us, and we try to synthesize that. And then this is an example that was done by Rock Smith, because what we'll do is at our district meeting, we will look at our district data, but then the expectation is that the PBIS representatives from each school will take that to their individual schools and do the problem of practice with their own specific school data. So after we take a few minutes to analyze the data, we will describe the problem in writing, and each person can, just on their Jamboard, put examples of what they think the problem is. So for example, looking at the example, the problem is behavior referrals are increasing in the classroom setting. The problem is that more referrals are written midweek on Tuesday and Wednesday, so that we're looking at the data that we're seeing. And then we will take, as a team, we'll take a few minutes and we'll rewrite the problem as a solvable question. For example, how might we fill in the blank? In what ways can we, or what is one idea for? So again, on another page of our Jamboard, we'll write it as a solvable question. about how we can support the students so that we can reduce those incidents of negative behavior. And those are some examples that they used at this specific school. Next, we'll take a few minutes and we'll discuss and agree on one question to answer. Lots of times what you'll see is that a lot of people have the same problem and they're asking, how can we solve this? And then we'll take a few minutes to discuss and agree on one question to answer. Then we'll work silently and individually to brainstorm answers to the selected question. We'll generate as many ideas as we can. So if you look at number 6, these are some examples of some possible solutions or some decisions we can make to support support the students in solving the problem that we see is happening. So for example, having consistent standards in the classroom, audit of classroom management practice, facilitate conversations with teachers and students when a referral occurs. And so there are a whole bunch of examples of ways that we can solve the problem. Then for number 7, it's choose the best solution and determine a plan of action. And 8 is the really important part, because Erica alluded to it earlier, is decide how we will access the effectiveness of the solution. So we have to progress monitor. We have to make sure that when we have our problem solving, who's going to be responsible for what, and when do we come back and figure if we actually did what we said we were going to do. So that part of it is extremely important to assess how well we did in solving the problem. And should we continue? Do we need to go back? Do we need to change it? Did we even do what we said we were going to do? So that last part is very important to decide beforehand. How are we going to determine whether we're doing what we actually said we were going to do in our action plan? Move forward. Okay. And then also we have the TFI walkthrough. So we'll go into buildings and make sure that just to see if the students know what our expectations are, and to see if they're actually getting the recognition for following through with those expectations. And we also interview teachers or staff members. It doesn't have to necessarily be a teacher, but it could be a staff member. So support staff as well, to see if they know what the expectations are, if they're teaching them to their students, and if they're giving the reward system, whatever it is, if it's tickets or points or positive referrals or whatever their recognition system is, to just get a pulse of what is going on in their building to see if it's actually being done with fidelity. Then we will meet with each school individually and score the TFI. Cleveland Heights is at tier 1, so we're doing the tier 1 TFI. And while we're doing the TFI, we're building our action plan. So we're putting in our steps as we're doing the TFI. If we grade ourselves a 1 or a 0, like there's something that we're still working on, then we will put that in our action plan. And we will also put who's responsible and what the timeline is, and how we're going to come back and assess whether we did what we said we were going to do. So based on the TFI, if we see that there are some buildings that need more support than others, then we will check in with them more often and make sure that we are present at their PBIS meetings to support them throughout the whole process. And I'm going to turn it over. If anyone has any questions, I think they are going to put my email after Maggie speaks. So I'm going to turn it over to Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good morning, everybody. Just a little note, it is pajama day for my first graders because their musical performance, so I am in Christmas pajamas. So appreciate that. Anyways, so kind of the problem of practice for us as on our PBIS team, last year we did not receive bronze, so we're going for bronze again this year. We needed to redo our recognition system. Last year we did not really have much of a data system as far as our recognition system went. We also use Infinite Campus, obviously. That's great for when you're talking about what kind of behaviors are we seeing in our buildings, when you're looking at individual students and their behavior. However, this year with our recognition system, we came up with sort of just a brag tag system where students are recognized for our big three. They're responsible, respectful, they're safe. Students' names are recorded on the back of the slips, and grade levels can earn them over the course of the month. And one grade level, whoever has the most, gets some kind of reward. The great thing with these slips is that every month they get counted. And so we have data every month based off of which grade level was the most respectful, responsible, or safe. We also have students' names written on the back, so we can keep track of what students received the most, and those type of things. So we have some data that corresponds to positive behavior. Last month, or at the end of October, we recognize that lunch and recess is always a struggle for us. It's somewhere that we're seeing the highest level of problems. There's obviously a lot of referrals written during that time, and different things happening. We wanted to know, is our lunch staff handing out the slips? Do we make sure that we have them? Nobody could really fully answer that question. Are we giving it to them? Do we know that they're handing them out? So discussing it as a PBIS team, as well as with our administrator, we thought, okay, we want to know if those slips are being handed out, and we want to know how many we're receiving at that time. So we talked about maybe labeling them specially, doing a different collection during that time. However, we landed on the idea, the simplest thing was just to print the slips on a different colored paper, so that every month we have a count of how many slips were received per grade level across the board, how many were received during the regular school day, and then how many were received at lunch and recess. And we actually decided last month to recognize a grade level overall, and we decided to recognize a grade level specifically for our lunch and recess time, and that those students would then receive a reward based off of how many they had earned. So that's kind of just an example of us, as we work through things as a PBIS team, coming up with solutions that can help us move in the right direction as far as collecting meaningful data and making good choices with it. We also have a plan in the future. Like I said, we didn't get bronze last year, and we would really like to get it this year. So once things are working more smoothly, the idea is that, let's say our referral data has a lot of students demonstrating using offensive language or something along those lines, then we can actually come up with a brag tag that would talk about, being kind to others, or being a communicator and solving problems with words, something along those lines. So there's flexibility with the brag tags in order to target specific behaviors. So that's kind of where we're at this moment in time. And that's all I have, unless anybody has any questions.
First off, thank you so much, CHUH, for presenting. That was awesome. Are there any questions for our guest speakers today? Feel free to come off mute or drop it in the chat and we can monitor that. I've had the privilege to work alongside Cheryl and the teams at CHUH for the past 2 years. And so it's really great to see the initiative from the district perspective, top down, to look at data. What are we doing with this data? How are we making it to move the needle in the right direction with our actions? So I thought you all presented some really good pieces of information on how to do that. And so applaud you for that. Thank you so much. And we did drop the contacts email in the chat, and also you can grab it off the screen as well. So if there's not any questions, we're going to continue to move forward. The next thing I do want to share is a tool that you all can use. So sometimes, I did propose a question in the chat, like, well, what are you using to collect your data, right? So it kind of starts with that. Are you able to access it? Is it graphable? Is it easy to read? Those are some some barrier sometimes for some teams and some districts to get that information. Recently, the Ohio Workforce and it's not due, Ohio Educational and Workforce released the Student Recovery Dashboard. And what this is a comprehensive look at schools in the state as it relates to a variety of categories. And the idea of this was to design to better understand the impact of the pandemic on Ohio students and the progress towards academic recovery. They're linked in here. And so I want to provide this to you because you can look at your building or district's attendance rates, proficiency rates, discipline, and it provides some pretty decent graphs, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner of what this looks like. I think this goes beyond PBIS in regards to collecting data. So you can look at KRA information. So there's a variety of things that you can pull. And I believe that they pull it from EMIS, a lot of this information, especially regarding discipline. And this is just a tool, and I think I'm gonna reshare it towards the end as well in the resources. But you're able to kind of dive in, and it gives you a culminating number and percentages of the years in previous, since 2000, I believe 18 and 19, it goes back to, and it has some data for you. However, we talk about using relevant and timely data. So if you are using Swiss or Infinite Campus, obviously those things can produce right away. You pull those, whether it's weekly, monthly, however that is, that's more appropriate. But if you are kind of stuck, this kind of gives you an idea of what trends have been going on for the past couple of years. So feel free to dive into that resource when you have some time. Again, it's a pretty good resource, and it goes beyond PBIS information. All right. So our next activity. So we're sitting here at 9:37. So we're great on time. Cheryl mentioned this idea of problem of practice, and sometimes we're able to collect that information, or someone's sitting on something that's just tough to work on. And sometimes it's easier as a team to get through that problem. So the way we have it set up is that I will present how to facilitate the problem of practice using some mock data. And then if you're wondering how this process works, we have a problem, let's get to some sort of action that the team or individual needs to take on it. I'm going to present a few different ways that it can be done. So if that interests you, that is one option for you. The other one is going to be more database conversations that's going to be led by Erica. And she has some questions that she has ready for you. And then that's going to be, free flowing. If you have questions, you can come off mute and participate that way. So there's going to be two different ways that we can go about this. We're going to spend about 12 minutes or so, maybe 15 in these rooms. If you choose to go to the data conversations one, but you're like, I kind of want to know what's going on with the problem of practice, I'm still going to be recording, and it's going to record the main breakout room. So it will capture what I'm talking about regarding the problem of practice protocol. So you can catch that on the recording when I send it back out, either tomorrow or Monday. So if you feel like you want to have some enriching conversations with your colleagues, feel free to jump in B. If you want to say, hey, let me figure out what this problem of practice is, maybe this is an activity I can use with my team, then feel free to stay in the main room. Again, this is what it kind of looks like as we move forward. Some of those questions are there, and I'll make sure I drop those in the chat as well before we go to our breakout room. Are there any questions before I open up that breakout room? Or Erica, you have anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered everything nicely.
Okay, so if you want to, if you have access to the PowerPoint, if you click on the problem practice, that's going to take you to our example that we're going to use. And at the end, when we do the regional updates, I do have a very basic template that you can use that will make you force a copy and you can have for your own. All right. So you're not going to break anyone's heart depending on where you go. So feel free to pick your journey, and we will do this for about 12 to 15 minutes based on our time.
Brian, why don't we try to come back by 9:52 maybe? So I mean, it'll cut short just a little bit, just so we can get through the updates really quickly to the regional and.
Sounds good. So again, if you want to watch problem practice, stay in this room. If you want to go into more database conversation, hang out with Erica. Give everyone a minute or so. That should be open.
Teresa, can you send me to 2? I'm trying to find a way to get there quickly. Can you send me there, please, Teresa?
Yes, I'll send you there.
All right, center. Boom.
Okay.
All right, I see some people kind of hanging out. Still deciding where to go. All right, so if you're sticking around, we're going to do the problem of practice, and it's on Jamboard. So full disclosure, unfortunately, Jamboard's going away in the end of the month. So if you want to adopt this may be something to where you can either just copy the questions or the format of it and put it into our work group uses it in Excel or Google Sheets, excuse me. So however you want to present it to your team, it can be done in many ways. We found that using Jamboard is just a little creative, and it helps with allowing teams to have input all at one time. So if you can follow along, you can click on this, and it's going to take us to the actual Jamboard itself. You should have access to it. And I'm just going to model it, and we'll go through it. We have some mock data that I found online that we can kind of just take a big team approach. So I see some people jumping in right now. I'll wait till everyone can click on that. If there's any issues with it, please drop your questions in the chat. All right, got a couple more people in here. So on this first slide, I gave you the outline of what it's going to look like as you go through it. Now the slides might not necessarily match up where it says, you know, the first slide, you're going to review the data, you're going to analyze it. It says slide 5, that might be a little off here. But we have it as a 12-minute protocol to get through all of this. I would say probably the first couple of times you may do this, it may take a little longer just because you want to give people the opportunity, and depending on what platform you're presenting from, there might be a little upscaling and teaching of it. So if you haven't been on Jamboard before, I'll take you a crash course through it. All right, so I'm going to move on to the next one, and I'm going to expand my screen just so everyone can see the aspect of Jamboard. So typically, the next slide would be some sort of data set that you have for your team. What does that look like? You know, we asked, a lot of people are using Power Schools, Infinite Campus, Swiss. Sometimes it's generated by a district Google form. So all those things are appropriate. And basically, if we get to slide 3, this is our mock data. All right. So this is a district view. And this could be a yearly at the, it's pulled in November. So this could be something that your team looks at. This is Infinite Campus that is being pulled, or the system that's pulling this information. So what we have for our first question at the top, we go to the next slide, is describe the problem in writing. So if you're looking at this screen here, what problem do you see? It can be more than one. What you would need to do, you'll probably toggle between slides 3 and 4. If I go over to the left-hand side, there's this thing called a sticky note. I click on the sticky note and you can put the problem is ... and then you would hit save and then it will post. All right, so it will be there. But go ahead, we're going to take 3 minutes. I'm going to probably speed this up a little bit. Give you about a minute and a half to look at this data and determine what you find to be the problem. All right. So go into this screen and just looking at that. If you need help, come off mute, scream, whatever you need to do.
Hey, Brian, this is
Yeah.
Heather Hyde from CHUH. I entered late. Could you send the link for the slides in the chat? I'm so sorry.
Oh, yeah. Gotcha.
Thanks.
I can't read this. Is there a way to make it bigger?
Good question. I can see if I can zoom in.
Control plus.
Is that working? That's as far as the control plus it gives me. Do you have the link, Chrissy? Uh-oh, we did. Here, I'll drop this in the chat too. Heather, did you want the did you just want the dashboard or the problem of practice, what we're doing now? Chrissy, if you can't, are you on the screen or are you looking at my screen?
I'm looking in my slides for this page.
Oh, okay. And you still can't see it?
I'm looking for it.
It's funny because I can tell like if people can't see it because they're like super close to their own screen. All right, something's going on here. So if you're just looking off my screen, it might be an issue, but I did drop it back into the chat and maybe that might help. I hope so. And sometimes when we look at the issue, it typically can be like the top piece. It could be, we see unexcused absence, truancy, or the number one resolution is detention. We have 317 suspensions in November. All right, we got one in there, truancy. Awesome. Oh. So if you're still doing that, that's fine. I'm looking at the time and realizing how quickly things are going to go. So the next piece with this, if we're on slide 4, and I do apologize that this is going to be pretty brief. Say we have a bunch of problems up there. We're going to select one. We have the one who put it in here. Thank you. We're going to go to the next slide on slide 5. I like to paste that problem, and then we're just going to rewrite this problem right here. The problem is truancy and students not being in their assigned area. So how can we reword that into a more of a solvable question? How might we, feel free to grab a sticky note and write down what that is. Like, what is one idea for having students in their assigned area? And you get fancy with it, change the color. There we go. Now people are adding some stuff. Awesome. And then basically what we would do as a team, we would talk about, all right, well, which one should we agree upon for this? Someone come off mute and say which Post-it note do you want to choose? First one wins.
How do we get students to class on time?
Beautiful. Thank you, Heather. All right. So right here, we got this guy. So then that is going to continue on to our next slide. So with this is where the idea piece comes in. You'll be working silently, individually, just brainstorming ways to do this. Like there would be like no judgment in this piece. And when it comes to this, like, what are your thoughts? Like from the most common ways to what is some extreme ideas that you might have. So this would be the area where we saw like a bunch of Post-it notes that were being tagged. And there we go. So we would start seeing all this traffic flow, figuring out where kids are. Keep them coming. There we go. School-wide, awesome. So with that being said, what we would do is then we would share out, especially if there's a lot. And then we would say, well, which one do we think would be the best, or how would have the biggest impact? Great. So if we choose and we decide on something, we can simply either circle it or maybe not order backwards. So we can either circle it. We had check marks, highlights, and then that would be the one that we're choosing of what to do. So if we check the attendance, incentives would be the next one. Ooh, and copy. I would just simply copy this one onto the next Jamboard, or excuse me, next slide. And it could be two or three, depending on what you have. And then you're going to figure out which one is going to be best. And then this is where we talk about, all right, well, if we're gonna do this, well, what does this look like in action, and who's going to be responsible for it? So it helps us nail down what this process is going to look like now that we've identified a problem, we've come up with some sort of solution, but what are the actionable steps, and what does it look like as we move forward? So who will do this, and then when you will have it done. Some teams have done it for short-term and long-term goals, and I think that does help bolster the idea of the initiative that you're doing. I know we kind of went through a brief section here with the problem of practice, but I do see that we do have about 5 minutes left. So I want to make sure that I respect that time for everyone, and we're not holding you too long after the call. All right. So I am breaking that room right now, and they should be coming back. Are there questions with the problem of practice? I know that was very brief and very quick to go through. So I do apologize about that. But anything that regarding this process?
Thank you for walking us through it. I really like how you modeled it, and I feel like I can, do that with more ease now that I, was a part of the process as well.
Well, thank you for that. I know it was pretty quick. And the access piece, especially through Zoom, is a little challenging. But yeah, if you do have any questions regarding like, hey, can you walk us through that again? Or if you want some individual attention, I can help you out with that. So the group looks to be coming back in now. So I'm going to continue on as they jump back in, and I don't know if they come back in, if your mics are on, please go ahead and just make sure you're on mute, and we're gonna finish up with some of this stuff. And Erica, are you back in here? I don't see you on my screen.
Yes,
I'm
yes, I'm
sharing.
back. Yes, I sure am. Yes.
Okay. Do you want to do a quick share out regarding the conversation in there before we get to our
Yes,
regional?
2 seconds. I was writing a response. We were in the middle of answering a question. So Tracy, I was about to write it in the chat. I'll email you the answer to your question that you asked for sure. But
Can you
we had
send it to all of us, Erica? I think it's a
absolutely.
bunch of us.
Absolutely. Tracy, I'm going to have you, if you wouldn't mind typing in the chat for me one more time, and then I'll definitely send it to everyone that was in the breakout room. We had wonderful conversations. One of the big conversations we had was around when you've got people that see the value of having collecting data, making decisions based on it, but when you don't have administrative support. That was a big part of kind of how to move forward when you don't have that administrative support, or when things are not district-wide, when you've got maybe one school using data, other schools not so much, and when at a district level, the buy-in and looking at that data and using it to drive decision-making isn't all the way there. So one of the suggestions that came from one of the districts was about having that external voice by way of SST or ESC kind of coming to the table. Another thing we talked about is maybe collecting whatever the person talked about how one of the schools is using data and using it for decision making. Maybe start looking at outcomes. If they can collect just a set of data, take that to admin and say, look, this is giving us the desired outcomes. So that school, they're getting the desired outcomes because they're using the data to drive the decisions that they're making. So we talked about that as well. And I'm trying to remember the other questions we had later. Oh, about action planning, talking about how do you, when you kind of start collecting data, how do you not go down a rabbit hole? How do you decide, prioritize what needs to be done, what doesn't? So the quick answer, Tracy, but I'll go in detail later, always look for what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Because when you start collecting data, yeah, you may see a million things that kind of need to be addressed. Prioritize, go for the biggest bang for the buck first. What's going to make the biggest impact, smallest change with the biggest impact. Look at that first. Not saying that everything else will get ignored, but you have to start somewhere. So start with what's going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. Brian, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think that's a great answer. And I know that it's probably, we can probably spend another half an hour on some of those solutions. So, and I'm thinking for our follow-up email, maybe we can go in a little bit more in depth for that answer. But I think those are really great questions to consider, especially when we're talking about data and like, hey, we need to have the decision makers at the table too to help support this. So awesome. That's great to hear that, that breakout group had some really enriched conversations. So we see the time. We got 2 minutes left. If you have to jump off at 10, we appreciate you being here and we hope you have a great break. But if you're able to stay on for the next couple of minutes, awesome. Please do so. As we do appreciate all that you're doing and the time that you're sacrificing. So those that did not or that did attend the problem of practice, this is a template. So you can, if you click on this, it should force a copy and you can have that for your own building, your own use, however you want to use it. Again, it's through Jamboard. If you missed my little speech, Jamboard is kind of going away at the end of the month. So I think there's something they're going to replace it. And I'm not sure what that's going to be. The next thing we have here is from PBIS.org. And it talks about, just this process of decision making. Maybe this is something that you need to help support your maybe your answers when trying to get that support from administrators. So if you're trying to get that support from the administrator, here's some good information to help, build your capacity to help advocate for their reasons of attending and helping out with this process. I also have Attendance Works, as we talked about some data points, and Cheryl mentioned too about chronic absenteeism. We know that this is a rise. This has been a big issue for the state, and there's a lot of information about what we can do about chronic absenteeism and how this falls within PBIS and the teams that work with it. So feel free to check that out. We've been advocating for OLAC and the Ohio PBIS network. That's going to be virtual next month, January 31st, 2024. So we look to see you there. And then here are our coaching networks coming up. There may be minor changes throughout for the last half of the year, but we have tier 2 interventions, PBIS recognition preparation, restorative practices, trauma informed, and then focus on next tier readiness. And those links have the registration for it as well, right? And then some of our other PDs that are coming up, if you're a district leader and you're looking to have maybe one of your buildings is not fully up going yet, we have new teams that are coming up along with early childhood tier 2 practices as well. And then we do have tier 3 coming in January. We have 2 spots in January and 1 in February. Erica? Oh,
Okay,
sorry. This is still my slide. This is our warehouse that you always have access to. Now, Erica.
Okay, just a couple of state updates this time around. This one, obviously very time appropriate by Misty. Coping with the holidays. So that is a hyperlink to a resource. And then if you look at the next one, SB 288, this is kind of an overview. So that's that Aaron's Law, that mandated training by way of public school works. So this is an option to meet the student training and not the in-service training. So the in-service training has not been released yet, but this is being added to the program matrix as an option for districts. So it focuses on prevention education, parent and guardian notification, a little bit more information about the in-service training requirements and some options, and then some resources as well. So that's hyperlinked. And then as always, we have our free online PBIS professional development website that you can access with short videos, organized modules, just to help you in your implementation of the multi-tiered system of support. So our next session, like Brian mentioned, will be January 18th, tier 2 interventions. Hopefully everyone will come back very well rested after this break that we're about to enter, and hopefully everyone has a wonderful break. Thank you so much for taking an hour out of your day to join us today. We really appreciate it. As always, feedback matters. We definitely use it for future sessions and in planning our next sessions and making sure we're meeting the needs of the region. So please fill out that survey for us, please. And thank you again so much for joining us today.
Thank you. We appreciate you, and we'll see you after break.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Happy holiday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So much.
Thanks for attending.
Thanks all.
Another school year.